Hi friends, it's Amy. Welcome to my channel. Today I have a used book haul. I have a stack from Goodwill, a large stack from Bethesda Thrift Store, and a smaller stack from St. Vincent de Paul Thrift Store. So let's get to it. So I'm going to start with my Goodwill purchases. So this is for my classroom. This is Michael Vey, Hunt for Jade Dragon. This is number 4 in the Michael Vey series by Richard Paul Evans. I love Richard Paul Evans books for adults. He writes wonderful stories. I didn't know that he wrote books for kids until one of my students told me about this series. I am now I've read the first 2 books. I'm on the 3rd book in the series, and I've been collecting the rest of the books as they find them used or whatever. I think now I am only missing 1, and that's really exciting. So Michael Vey is I think he's like an early high schooler, and he has this ability to electrify things around him. And he's surprised in the first book to find out that he's not the only one with these strange abilities. And it all comes down to the day and the place that he was born. Now, all of these kids that are like him, their abilities manifest in different ways, but they all are tasked with fighting this evil force that is trying to use their powers for bad instead of good. And some of them go the way of evil, and some of them go the way of good. And so Michael Vey is kind of working through that the whole time. I loved the first book. I found it incredibly creepy for, I would call this a young adult book, simply because the main villain in the book, and I use quotes like he's not a villain, he totally is, but the main villain in the book uses like scare tactics that would absolutely work. It's so realistic in that aspect. It's not, it's very realistic in the scare tactics that are used to get these kids to do what he wants them to do. And it took me a while to recover from reading the first one, but I was excited to read the second one. And then I had to take another break. Like they're just those kind of books. For me, my student who introduced me to him was reading these, like just absorbed them as soon as he could get his hands on them. So that is Michael Vey, Hunt for Jade Dragon. And then another one that I picked up, looked interesting, is Worlds of Ink and Shadow by Lena Coakley. And this was in the clearance section. And it was interesting to me because it is a fictionalized account of the Bronte sisters. And I just thought that was really cool. So I picked it up. The next book is Beach Town by Mary Kay Andrews. And I pretty much pick up any Mary Kay Andrews book that I come across when I'm thrifting because I love Mary Kay Andrews. I love how she writes a story, and I love how she writes characters. They're full and they're vibrant and they're quirky, and I just really get a kick out of all of her books. So when I saw this one, and it focuses on a movie location scout, and there's like grumpy actors and grumpy directors, I was like, yep, sign me up. So that's Beach Town by Mary Kay Andrews. And The Chicken Sisters by KJ Dell'Antonia was a Reese's Book Club pick. And this is, oh look, it has a bookmark in it. I love these books. I own bookmarks like this, and this is not mine. That is so cool. Okay. I'll put that somewhere. This is about 3 generations, 2 chicken shacks, and 1 recipe for disaster. What really drew me to this is that we have Food Wars, the reality TV restaurant competition that promises $100,000 to the winner. I am a sucker for food competition, reality TV in novels, and so I decided to pick this one up. Then my last one, I told myself, if I see this book in a thrift store, I get to buy it. Like, no questions asked, it's mine. I've been looking forward to reading this book. I've heard so many good things about this book, and I loved this author's latest book that I got my hands on. So this is The Winemaker's Wife by Kristin Harmel, and I loved the Book of Lost Names so much. I love a good dual timeline story. It's really how I like to absorb my historical fiction, and she's just a master at it. So this takes place in Champagne during the Second World War in 1940 and in New York in 2019. I've heard so many people say good things about this book. I just knew that it was going to be on my TBR, and if I found it, I was going to buy it. So I'm really glad that it was at a used bookstore. So that's the end of my Goodwill stack. Then I have a stack that I got from the Bethesda. I have a bunch of books for my classroom, so I'm going to look at those first. So this first one is Endling, The Last by Katherine Applegate. And this is the first in a series. It says, in book 1 of Katherine Applegate's epic fantasy adventure, young Bix fears she might be the last of her kind. Bix was used to being last, the last in her pack and family, the youngest and the smallest, the last anyone believed would survive in their dangerous kingdom. Bix was not afraid to be the first to die. She just did not want to be the last to live. The Endling. So she is going to be working, I think this is Bix right here, but I'm not sure. She's just adorable. This guy looks fun too. I don't really know anything more about the series, but I do know about Katherine Applegate, and I like how she tells a story. The price was definitely right. So that is The Endling by Katherine Applegate. And I have another book by Katherine Applegate, and that is The One and Only Bob. Look at this superb hardcover of a book that just came out in last year, in 2020. This is the sequel to The One and Only Ivan, and that is about our gorilla Ivan here. I loved The One and Only Ivan. It was a spectacular book. It was heartfelt and wonderful. I picked this up from the library as soon as I could get my hands on it. Actually, I stole it from my nephew. Here's a story. My nephew was able to get it from his library before I could get it from mine, and he wasn't going to get to it right away, so I stole it from his library pile. That's the kind of conniving aunt I am. Hopefully, I'm also a really awesome one, and it was worth it to let me steal his library book. But I did enjoy it. I really like Bob the dog. He's a really fun character. I love his characterization and how she brings him in. I liked the action in the story. I just didn't love it as much as I loved The One and Only Ivan, and it would have been so difficult to get to that point because I just really loved The One and Only Ivan. So I'm really excited to have this in my classroom. I think there are a lot of my students that will really latch onto this, and I think a lot of my students are into like the spirit animal. There's another series that they really like, and I can't think of what it is, but they're really into those kinds of fantasy animal series. So I think a lot of my students are going to like these too. Another book for my classroom is Riding Freedom by Pam Muñoz Ryan, with drawings by Brian Selznik. So Brian Selznik is just a really fabulous illustrator. If you don't know who that is, you'll hear about him a little bit more in a second. Pam Muñoz Ryan wrote Echo, which is just fabulous. If you haven't listened to it in audio, I totally recommend that. And she also wrote Esperanza Rising. And Esperanza Rising is just a wonderful story. Echo's a wonderful story. I knew I was pretty safe picking this one up. I don't know much about it. I know that it takes place in the 1800s. I know that the main character is a girl who is growing up in an orphanage for boys, and she's totally okay with that. And that's about all I know. She loves horses. That's all I know about it. But it just seemed like a book that I should get in my classroom when I saw it. So it's in wonderful shape. Speaking of Brian Selznik, I picked up Wonderstruck by Brian Selznik. Now this book is missing its dust jacket, and I don't really mind. This is a replacement copy. My copy of Wonderstruck disappeared. It's been missing for a year, I think, that I haven't seen it. And I love Wonderstruck, and I want to get it in my students' hands. So when I saw this at Bethesda, I was like, yeah, let's pick that up and get it into my classroom. This follows a young girl who is deaf or hard of hearing, and another girl who is deaf or hard of hearing in two different timelines. And then the timelines come together. One timeline is told with words, and one timeline is told with illustrations, and then they come together. It is gorgeous and wonderful and beautiful, and it is my favorite. I like this one better than The Invention of Hugo Cabret, and I love The Invention of Hugo Cabret. So I'm actually a little bit afraid to watch the movie on Amazon Prime. I'm going to do it eventually, but I'm a little bit afraid because I just don't want this book to be ruined. But I'm excited to get this replaced in my classroom. Dust jacket or no dust jacket. And then the last book for my classroom from Bethesda is How High the Moon by Karyn Parsons. And this book caught my eye because of this beautiful blue color. But that's not why I got it. I got it because I was looking at it and I saw blurbs from Jacqueline Woodson, Kwame Alexander, Jewel Parker Rhodes, Rita Williams Garcia, and Renee Watson. Those are 5 authors that I highly respect their opinion and their writing. And if they're telling me that I might like this book or that students should be reading this book, I want it in my classroom. So this is about 12-year-old Ella living in Jim Crow South, who spends her days fishing and running around the small town of Alculu, South Carolina, with her cousins Henry and Myrna. But life is not always so sunny for Ella, who gets bullied for her lighter skin tone and whose mother is away pursuing a jazz career up north in Boston. So we have a girl who is kind of on her own and different from other people, and she's trying to deal with that. I'm excited to read this, and I'm very excited to get it into my students' hands. So whether I get to it this summer before I can get it into their hands or not, I don't know. But when it is that well recommended, I just couldn't pass it up. Then I got some books for me. This one I have read before, but I just loved it so much. This is Dear Edward by Anne Nepolitano. This is about Edward, who was the sole survivor in a plane crash. And it goes on to deal with how he is able to survive the aftermath of everything that's happened. How he as a survivor is exploited by the media and by the country, and how he has people around him that are protecting him and trying to still allow him to have the best life possible, even though he lost his parents and his brother in this terrible crash. It also explores the life of some of the other people that were on the plane. It's just a wonderful story, and I really liked it, and I just wanted to have a copy on my shelves so I can push it into other people's hands. So some of my friends will be seeing this very soon. Next, I found the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society by Mary Ann Shaffer and Annie Barrows. So this takes place in London in January of 1946. In the shadow of Second World War, writer Juliet Ashton is looking for her next book subject. Who could imagine that she would find it in a letter from a man she'd never met, a native of Guernsey, the British island once occupied by the Nazis. He'd come across her name on the fly leaf of a second-hand volume by Charles Lamb. Perhaps she could tell him where he might find more books by this author. As Juliet and her new correspondents exchanged letters, corresponded, exchanged letters, she is drawn into the world of this man and his friends, all members of the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, a unique book club formed in a unique spur-of-the-moment way as an alibi to protect its members from arrest by the Germans. This was made into a movie and on Netflix, and I actually watched it already, and I really liked it. And I'm excited to read this. It's an epistolary novel. I love epistolary novels. My sister, who doesn't love epistolary novels, also really enjoyed this book. So that's a stamp of approval right there. But I've also heard that it's really good to listen to. So I think I might get the audiobook, see if I can find the audiobook and follow along, or I don't know, go back and forth. But I'm excited to have the paper copy in my hands. The Last Lecture by Randy Pausch is a book that has been on my radar for a really long time, and I've never really been able to find a copy of it in a thrift store before. But Randy Pausch was a college professor, and his college did this lecture series called The Last Lecture. And they would have they would talk to the professors, and they'd say, all right, you are going to have your very last lecture ever. What are you going to tell your students? And then they had the opportunity to do that. And Randy Pausch was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and then he gave his last lecture as part of that series. And I've heard that story so many times, and it just sounds so inspirational and wonderful. I've heard parts of the lecture that he's given, and I just wanted to read the book. So when I saw it, I thought I would pick it up. I picked up A Piece of the World by Christina Baker Kline. This is her follow-up to The Orphan Train, and I really loved The Orphan Train. I love the writing style, and I just feel like Christina Baker Kline is an author that I am probably going to enjoy. What really intrigues me about this is that it's inspired by the painting Christina's World, and I have memories of looking at that painting during art class when I was in elementary school. My art teacher had that painting up in his classroom. He had paintings all over the place. It was phenomenal. But I remember looking at that painting, and I spent more time looking at that painting trying to figure out the story behind Christina's World than actually doing art, which is probably why I'm not very good at art. But Christina Baker Kline actually wrote down an imagined story of that painting, and that really is intriguing to me, and I can't wait to dig into it at some point. So then the last place that I went on my thrifting this month was St. Vincent de Paul. So I found this book for my classroom. It's called Urban Outlaws, An Unstoppable Team Mind-Blowing Mission by Peter J. Black. And it just looked really interesting to me. My students love spy kind of things. Spy School by Stuart Gibbs, City Spies by James Ponti. They just really get into those kinds of things and latch onto them. And this is about some orphans that live deep beneath the city, which I thought was really cool. Trying to right the wrongs of the society through random acts of kindness. They have the gadgets, guts, and guile to outsmart their enemies and help those in need. They live off the grid, and nobody knows they exist. I thought this would be a book that some of my students would really get into, so I picked that up. And then this is And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer by Fredrik Backman. And I feel like I keep on picking up books by Fredrik Backman because I feel like I'm going to love them and not read them. So I have a couple of his books, and I haven't read them at all, but this is just a really short book, and it's a novella about a grandpa and his grandson, and they sit and they just tell stories to each other. I just thought that it would be a good book to kind of read slowly and just kind of immerse myself into Fredrik Backman's writing, and then really know if it's writing that I can grab onto. I also have A Man Called Ove, and I want to read that at some point as well. This book was recommended to me by my aunt. This is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. This is a nonfiction book. I can tell it's going to take me a while to get through this, But it just sounds really interesting. Doctors took Henrietta Lacks cells without asking, and the cells never died. They launched a medical revolution and a multi-million-dollar industry. More than 20 years later, her children found out, and their lives would never be the same. So it just goes on about how like medical testing and things like that have worked in the past. I am not a huge nonfiction reader. I don't know how this is going to go, but I've heard so many good things about this book, and I just really want to try it. And I found it for a pretty decent price. So I decided to pick that one up. And then lastly, I have another Kristin Harmel book, and that is The Art of French Kissing. This says, how do you say so many men, so little time in French? Well, Emma Sullivan can always figure that out later. The point is, she's in Paris, which would be great, except that she's stuck doing public relations for one of the hottest and craziest rock stars on the planet. I think this sounds really fun. I already know that I love Kristin Harmel's writing style. I've heard her talking about it on the Friends and Fiction webisodes, and it just sounds really fun. So I thought there was no harm in picking it up. So that is The Art of French Kissing by Kristin Harmel. So that is my stack. Here's part of it. Here's part of it. Here's another part of it. And here's another part of it. So have you read any of those books that I have hauled? Do they sound interesting to you? Which ones should I jump to? Which ones should jump to the top of my TBR as soon as possible? Let me know down in the comments. I would love to chat with you down there about them. In the meantime, happy reading. Bye.